Hello,
Rabbi,
Isaac.
good afternoon.
Good
Hello, Rabbi.
afternoon.
So good to see you.
I love the exuberance.
Well, do I wish you blessed Pesach, happy Pesach? You said this is a week long celebration or a week-long, what do you call it? Is it a week-long celebration?
Well, this is actually a really interesting holiday, Passover, in that the Bible has two separate holidays. One is called Passover, which took
Mm-hmm.
place. It's a one-day festival where you bring the Paschal Lamb, and then there's a holiday called the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which lasts for 7 days. So really, the holiday biblically is 8 days, but there was a time period sometime between the first and third century
Mm-hmm.
that those lines blurred, that Jews stopped celebrating it as two separate holidays. They
Mm-hmm.
celebrated it as only one 7 day holiday, and then the holiday with the destruction of the temple and the Paschal Lamb not really being brought anymore, even though you can bring a Paschal Lamb without a temple. They kind of stopped celebrating it, except for refraining from various kinds of work during that time period, which is really, really, again, like lots of interesting things. I read
Mm-hmm.
an article recently that said that one of the reasons that they stopped focusing on that holiday is because one of the differences between the synoptics and John is that the synoptics say that Jesus was kind of killed on the 15th of Nisan, while John says Jesus was killed on the 14th of Nisan, which
Mm-hmm.
means that while the synoptics, Jesus dies on the holiday, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. For John, Jesus is the Paschal Lamb offering,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore he replaces the Paschal Lamb, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore it could be that it's a polemic against Christianity that Jews kind of stopped celebrating the 14th and stopped kind of having a focus on the sacrificial aspect of the holiday, and we more focus on Exodus and storytelling and matzah.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that background. What I remember, so the thing which strikes me the most is last year this time, Rabbi Sachs he gave a TED talk. He gave one of the talks on TED when when the pandemic had just hit, and one of the questions posed to him was, what did he feel about this pandemic? Now, a year ago, this time we had a lockdown. People couldn't come outside, and they asked him, "Do you see any parallels between what's happening now and what happened 2,000 years ago?" Oh, I mean, way more than 2,000 years ago, when 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 the Israelites were leaving Egypt. And his answer was very profound. He said, what this reminds us is that no matter how educated or healthy or wealthy or whatever you name it, we are all susceptible to these microscopic species, which can just take life away. And he reframed it as a call to humility, and to understand that, again, that humanity is one in its pursuit, and there's something common to all of us, irrespective of a person's, again, education or status or wealth or race or whatever. And I just thought his way of approaching that was very profound. But it turns out that's a recurring theme in many of his it appears to be a recurring theme in many of his books and writings. Anyway, on that note, I guess we can get started today.
Yeah, so we're still on the mound.
That's right, yeah.
We haven't left the mound. The mound is great.
Mhm.
And we will now let's go into our second metaphor. Now that we finished salt.
The Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 5, verse 14. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden.
Okay.
I
Uh,
mean,
you
is
can
that,
finish the metaphor if you want. We were only going to discuss that one today, but
yeah,
if you feel like I can't break that metaphor, it's wrong, sacrilegious, then please continue.
verse 15. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven.
True. Truer words have never been said. Great. So I think our starting point is, we definitely will talk about the hill subsequently, but light is the metaphor. If I had to say, what is the most important metaphor that happens in the world? What is the most misused? What is the most abused metaphor in the world? It's light. If anything, it kind of harkens into this idea, this primordial idea of light and darkness, white and black, good and evil,
Uh-huh.
So we always have that. So you can always just use light as good. But I think when we talk about light along with another metaphor, namely representative of some aspect of the world, it opens up the idea. So let's not spend endless time on the metaphor of light, but let's start with, Isaac, your background, and see what does light mean to you in your upbringing?
Yeah, so I mean, so in this context, at least the way I was raised and my initial instincts would be, it speaks to character and integrity of way and life. As in, I'm reminded of the quote from Rabbi Sachs. He speaks about he speaks quote the ethical structure of reality. In the sense, he speaks about the character and how all fits together. And so that would be my initial take on this. If this is pointing to
Be a good person. That's what it sounds like you're saying. Ethical character, be moral. You are
well,
the moral
yeah,
folk of the
being
world.
yeah. So being moral is one thing. Having integrity is another thing, right? I mean, so integrity it's a bit more hard to define. It's way a person lives. One could have high morals, but may or may but uh, it does not mean they have integrity. It's hard to define. It's hard to pinpoint. It's hard to put a pin um, on integrity. When we see it, when we see it, we can identify it, but it's hard to define. Here's exactly what's meant by. Here's exactly what's meant, or what's meant by integrity.
That's interesting. So I'll point out again, like we could speak forever about this, but I will point out that in Judaism,
Mhm.
there's these unlimited metaphors of light and Hanukkah paralleling much the Indian the Hindu festivals of lights.
Diwali. Mhm.
Yeah, Diwali. But we actually do see that there's this idea of a hidden light, which I think from a rabbinic perspective is probably the most interesting thing to add to this. Um, that sometimes other nations are called darkness. For
Mhm.
example, the kingdom of Greece is called darkness, but we say that Adam Harishon, the first Adam, the Adam of the Bible story, there was a light in the world that existed during his lifetime. It was a primordial light, and this a light allowed him to see from one side of the world to the other, whatever that means.
Mhm.
Uh, um, and that light eventually was hidden away. So, for example, in the creation story, where it says, "Let there be light," there's almost like this dual element. There's light, there's light to be able to see, but then there is this metaphysical light that gives you a greater insight into the universe. And this
Yeah.
insight was hidden away after the primordial sins of Adam and Eve, and
Mhm.
only the righteous are really able to tap into
Mhm.
these. So, for example, in the Gemara in the Talmud Bavli Chagiga 12a, it says that Adam Harishon was able to see from one end of the world to the other. It doesn't obviously mean that he was tall enough because the world was round, or even if you want to say it's flat, it wouldn't make sense. What it means is that he was able to tap into some underlying uh, foundational ideology of the metaphysics,
Mhm.
physics of the world.
Mhm.
So, I think when we speak of light, we always have to see, like in the rabbinic text, how this light kind of played out, that we have this primordial light that Adam specifically could use. So, very much the Gemara refers to the Beit HaMikdash as the light of the world. And a lot of times that is supposed to be God's place on earth. So, independent of all the ethical, moral, light is good and darkness is evil, we also see that light could also be something that you can't access. When
Mhm.
you say that you're supposed to be the light of the world, it could
Okay.
be you're
Mhm.
supposed to, because I think I'm not trying to be exclusivistic about Jesus' message, because I don't think it inherently is, but I do think we have to be exclusivistic about people who could really tap into the underlying nature, but what he's trying to execute, what he's trying to accomplish in the world, how it really is somewhat out of pocket. It's out of hand for a lot of people. So to talk about this light of the world, you are the light of the world, it's saying maybe that this original hidden light that Adam Rishon had, that once we are able to come now back to a messianic era from Jesus' perspective, that light would have been like open from its hidden chest. That light that Adam Rishon lost, that Adam the first lost, would have been kind of revealed, and Jesus would have had it. Someone say, "You are the light of the world." It's not only that you guys are model characters or you guys can be good people, it's that you're tapping into a light that no one else could have had for the last 3,000, 10,000 million years, whatever it is. And now you're kind of bringing back this truth. And again, like light is truth, light is everything. But I think that, especially from a Jewish perspective, in that time period, it would have been normal to think about light as something that other people can't access because of their darkness.
Well, this explains so much of Pauline thinking.
Oh my God, back to Paul. If you're
Can
going to cross off Luke, I'm going to cross off Paul, man.
No. What you just explained, right? This notion that as Christians or as Jesus, in this verse over here, that they have access to some deeper truth, that they have access to some deeper, or they have some access to some, or the epistemological truth, right? Or they have access to some to the metaphysical truth, which is hidden to the others, but it's been revealed to this group of people, right? I mean, and if that is common, I felt like, Paul probably builds on top of that to say that he's got some extra,
Right. Yeah, some special
extra
message.
special. Now, would you say that this also applies to John the Baptist, right?
Yeah, no. So I again, like, I don't differentiate John the Baptist and Jesus as much as you do.
Yeah.
I think that Jesus would have had different messages somewhat, and it's hard to really understand the enigmatic message of Jesus just because it's spoken such. He's just lacking in loquaciousness. He's just not a verbose person in the first aspect of Matthew. So it's a good question, and that scholars always try to differentiate what is the religion of John versus the religion of Jesus. And I think, at least from Matthew, what the evangelist wants us to know is that they're identical. He's the predecessor, he's the successor, he's the one who initiates the Messianic era, he's the one who lives the Messianic era. But going back to your last point, there's even this idea that shows up again in the Talmud in Tanit 7b that says there's no light but Torah. And I think that idea is that light is an exclusive base of knowledge. And if you want to access that light, you have to kind of delve into the teachings of that religion. And it's interesting, when Jesus is saying now you are the light of the world, there's so many different ways we could take it. We could say that they're meant to spread the message. We could say that he's meant to, it sounds like you're saying he's kind of giving them a prescription. You are meant to lead and show people how to be ethical. But it's also like you are the light of the world, or you're the only ones who are tapping into this knowledge now by access through me, Jesus, that other people could have further access to it.
Yeah, so it's knowledge or a sense of or this awareness, right? So knowledge sometimes could just mean this abstract thinking or being knowing something. I think what he's pointing to is having this sense of awareness which permeates one's being, to know that, like, this is who I am. It's not how much what I know, but the person of who I am, and how that that awareness can shape one's life in this world. Yeah. So when people heard this, right, would they have been surprised by this, or do you think this? Oh yeah, we know what he's talking about. Light of the world. This is
the metaphor of I don't want to make it sound it, but the metaphor of light is banal and trite. If you say to anyone, "You are the light," everyone's like, "Yes, I am the light." I think that people would have been, it would have resonated as kind of commonplace. I think when we talk about in Judaism about this hidden light, it almost is a technique to make it the light being a meaningful metaphor again. Because all of a sudden, when the light is a hidden light, and it's not a light that you're normally talking about, what we're saying is there's two different kinds of light, and the light that is your metaphor is not the light that is my metaphor. So I think that's kind of one of the attitudes that, when it says God created light in the beginning of Genesis.
Well, God said,
"Let there be light."
Let there be light. So yeah. Which means light wasn't created. Light was already there. Well, he didn't create light. He said, "Let there be light." In the sense, he didn't say, "Let's create light." He said, "Let there be light," and so which means light moved into this place.
I'm not sure that's a good reading of Hebrew, but I think it might be a good reading of the Greek translation from the Latin into your English.
Okay.
I would accept that as that. But when we say "let there be light," if you look at the other things that are listed in Genesis, "let there be this," it does look like it is creation. And when you look at Genesis and you see the different kinds of verbs that are used for created, there's God made things, he formed some things, he created some things. And from a philosophical perspective, it's not always clear. what the difference is. So I would say, what you're saying is acceptable. It's like, was there a primordial light that God tapped into and brought into the world? But again, I think when Judaism brings this idea of this hidden light, this Oregon news, it really opens up the door to saying that we don't want this banal or trite kind of light. We have another kind of light that's not a metaphor, that's a throwaway metaphor, but it's meant to tap into something that's really a deeper kind of concept. And I think that a first century Jew or second century Jew, especially as the Talmud cites this ideas, and then generally the view as earlier ideas, would have been something that's meaningful. But I think also when you talk about light, it really opens up, when you see the second half of this verse, it really opens up a different kind of light, right?
So, okay, so I have a question on this. So, verse 13 was, you are the salt of the earth. Verse 14 is, you're the light of the world. The word world and earth, are they the same thing, or at least are they?
Yeah, I would say they're synonyms. So I could look at the Greek really quickly, see if it's the same word. If you want, world. Yeah, it looks like I don't have the other verse in front of me right now of the Greek.
Yeah, okay.
But whatever. Yeah, in general, when we speak about even in Psalms, when we use different words for earth, what do we got? So we got Aretz, we got Tevel, right? Isn't Tevel? I think that most people think of these things as generally interchangeable. Even when we speak about dirt, they're generally interchangeable. I would say that it's not so much a deeper meaning. I'll be honest, even when we spoke about the idea of earth and we spoke about kingdom of heaven, at least I wanted to argue that those were synonyms. So if kingdom of heaven and earth could be synonyms, anything could be a synonym at that point. But yeah, if you thought of a good idea that differentiates two, I'd definitely be open to.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any. I was just asking the question.
Yeah, I think in Hebrew, they use somewhat interchangeable. The name Adam means dirt. So
Adam.
Adam, yeah, exactly. That's some good Hebrew pronunciation.
A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. It feels like these are two different verses.
Let's go slowly, right? So a city set on a hill. So number one, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't point out how John Winthrop and Martin Luther King used this verse. The way that this verse from I think our young poet laureate who introduced Joe Biden also.
Yeah.
So you're not a good Christian poet unless we say your city set on a hill. I think that's the starting point. I write a speech and I'm speaking from Christians. I'm going to speak from a podium, from a dais, and say, I am on a hill. And that is meaningful to you in some ambiguous way. So I think the way that John Winthrop used it is probably the way that it became more meaningful in speeches. He used it when the early Americans or pre-Americans were set up in Massachusetts, and he was saying that we're leaving the tyranny of Europe and we're trying to set up an ideal city. We're almost trying to be what Jerusalem is envisioned in the Bible. We're going to set up America, or at least his city on a hill, to be that way. So he obviously was not citing anything from Tanakh, from the Old Testament. He was citing this verse right here, which definitely has parallels, which we'll mention, to places in Tanakh. So it's interesting, just the cuteness of a literalness. He's on a hill, and it's a metaphor. He's trying to set up a city on a hill. So we get like almost he's like he could be pointing to the ground under him as he said this. But if I asked you now, just for you, if someone wants to set up a city on a hill, what are the different metaphors that are implied? And just keep in mind that we say it cannot be.
I would probably scratch my head when you say city on a hill, right?
So scratch your head on a city on a hill, everyone will see it.
Yeah, like so what do you mean city on a hill, right? I mean, because a hill, it's meant to imply that it has the peak has it has a vertical peak, it has a peak, and so how do you set something on top of?
Tom, you're thinking of like a pyramid right now. That's not how hills work. Generally, the way a hill works is that the peak will be flat, and you can set a city on top of it. It's not meant to be like a logical contradiction. This is not a city on a pyramid. A city on a hill means like Washington Heights, where you work, is a hill. That's why it's the heights. So you could set up cities on hills. There's no problem with setting up, at least logistically, setting up a city on a hill. The very famous city Masada.
Is this the reason why? Is this the reason why the Yeshiva University is on a hill in Washington Heights and not in some flat land elsewhere?
The reason YU is in Washington Heights is because it was cheaper land. The reason that it's on a hill is because from my National Geographics that I read 25 years ago, it said that they flattened all of New York City. They took all the lakes and threw their mountains in and flattened it. And once they got up to Washington Heights, they said, no one cares about this land. It's too north. The Jews are going to set up their YU anyways. Who cares? So they let it, they never flattened it. But the point is, my point is, like, if you look at Masada, if you could Google or Wikipedia Masada after, you'll see there's a mountain that they flattened. And on that one side of it is a castle, and the most part it's flat. So the idea of a mount of a city is very normal. And the most famous one, which obviously I would say is the one that we see throughout Tanakh, and I'd say that obviously the one that's being referenced here is Jerusalem. Jerusalem is very, very, very concretely a city on a hill. If you go look around the old city of Jerusalem, which is the historical parts of Jerusalem, or even where the city of David was, what you'll see is there's a peak on one side of it that protects it against incoming armies. So it's very normal in the olden days to set up cities on hills for either protection of a war. But even if you drive around New York, or if you drive, like I was noticing in Teaneck, I pointed out to my wife the other day that when you pass the Methodist church on the main road, you can see in every direction it goes down. There was this idea that Christian, Jews, and Muslims always wanted the tallest thing. There's actually a rule in all three religions that you want to be in the highest point possible, closest to God, or spiritually uplifting, or see the metaphor of the littleness. So there's actually this comical idea that all Christians, Jews, and Muslims have to have the highest edifice, highest monolith on their churches. So that's why churches have that big peak at the top. That's why mosques have the minaret, and that's why synagogues are tall were generally, made, like if you look in Turkey, were made into other religious elements. So it's one of those comical things that all religions have. But the idea is, why would you want the church on the highest mount? See it. So that's one way. If you're far away, you could see it. But I think that while that's literally true, the metaphor was always more important. That we're not only spiritually important, but we're spiritually high. If you want to go to church, you're going literally and metaphysically higher to a different realm, to pray, to worship, to be close with God. Especially when you view God in somewhat an anthropomorphic sense, being the guy who's sitting in heaven on a chair somewhere. Okay, so let's go back to now our metaphor. So a city that's set on a hill.
But that goes against all of Christianity, right? At least what the gospel says. So,
oh my God!
What are you talking about? Is this Epicurean God above, here below, and
you notice how all churches have that big spire at the top, right? You ever wonder why they have a spire?
Yeah, but that's just part of architecture, just part of what.
But why is it part of the architecture?
Does there have to be a reason as to why this?
Yeah, there's a very good reason. I mean, that what you're saying is a little ridiculous. There's a historical and spiritual. There's a rule in most places, like there's a rule that a Jew wasn't allowed to be higher space than a Muslim ever. A Jew was never allowed to pass on a horse. Anytime that a synagogue happened to be on higher land than a church, they'd force you to knock it down. The church is the highest thing in the city. And again, for me, one of the ironies of New York City is that because as the skyscrapers kept getting built taller and taller, and the churches were protected buildings and couldn't be built taller, it got this irony that the things that you worship in America, in New York City at least, is capitalism. And you see that the skyscrapers are representative of that dichotomy between the church couldn't grow higher, it's like locked into the path, and these places got higher and higher. So you have these spires that go up to a third or fourth floor next to a 90-floor building. It's almost like this irony. But again, it's also a rule in Judaism. I'll condescend upon all three religions, as I point out that all of them want to be as high as possible, and the irony that they generally feel. So one of the questions that we ask in Judaism is that if our temple is meant to be the highest place in Israel, it's very obviously the Mount Zion, the mount where the Mount Moriah, where the temple is not actually the tallest mountain in Jerusalem. And I view that as okay because it's probably the most protected and it has a water source. So if you gotta have to choose like your battles, it's nice to be tallest. It's also nice to be able to take a siege. So especially when you consider that Jerusalem's been under more than a dozen sieges throughout its history. Okay, but let's go back to the Matthew. A city that's set on a hill cannot be hid. So there's actually two concepts here, right? There's one that it's high. So we have all these spiritual elevated ideas, but what does it mean it cannot be hid? There's a positive connotation and a negative connotation to not being able to be hid. So what do you think, Isaac?
I think it's a positive. I do not know why. I do not know what's negative. So positive in the sense that you are the light of the world. Light of the world is meant to shine light, as you discussed earlier. Light is brightness, goodness, and it's meant to be away from darkness. And this, as in a city set on a hill, cannot be hidden. As in you, to me, this feels like a rehash of you are the light of the world. As in you are meant to show your light to the world, and so by being set on high, your light shines brightly.
Well, yeah, 100%. But I would say that there's a positive negative connotation. When you're in high and you cannot be hid, positively, then everyone could look to you, for example.
Yeah.
But negatively, then if you cannot be hid, then you also can't hide any of your traits that you may want to hide. So, for example, if you look at a lot of the things that were said in the Beatitudes, they might
But
be
you,
negative.
but you are the salt of the world, right? If the salt of the world, it is so. Yeah, and I hear what you're saying. But wouldn't you want to look at this in context of the earlier verses? And you are the salt of the earth, and he's saying that there's something within you where this is who you are. As in,
No,
you
100%.
can.
I think the light is inherent. Again, like I'm not saying it's negative. I'm just saying it has all these connotations inherent. Let me give you an example from the Tower of Babel. The
Mhm,
Tower of Babel. I don't know, saying it was the Babylonian Tower.
mhm. The
There's different opinions about why they built a tower, but one of the ideas is that they built a tower to make a more of a police state. That when you're on high, you're able to kind of keep track of everything that's happening. And when you're on high, an example, not only you're an example for people who are watching, but you also have the ability to see them looking down upon them, upon what they're doing, if they're keeping your law that you set forth. And not only that, it allows you to kind of interact with them at a level of saying like, why are you not doing that? So they have like this people who are on high have a bilateral relationship. They're judges and judgees. That they feel people looking at them, but they're also able to cast judgment. It also has this idea of almost like isolation, that
mhm.
if I'm judging, I can be separate. So again, like I'm not saying these inherently are negative concepts. There's nothing bad about looking upon your subjects and saying that I want you to be good people. But I feel there is like this negative connotation that you have this bilateral relationship that's not even.
Mhm.
When you have it a completely egalitarian society, you don't need a tower. You don't need to stand high because everyone's kind of living messianically in a utopian society, and the eschatological end has come, and you can kind of live in the way you want to live. But when you have a city and high, what it almost is inviting this idea of a two-level state. Almost like the complaints that capitalists have against communists, that communism doesn't work, and because communism doesn't work because you always have people who are separating themselves, the elites. So we are setting up an elite system here. The people who Jesus is speaking to at the Mount are either, you could say this is the apostles or the crowds or whatever followers. It's saying you guys are special because you have access to information, but that also creates this dichotomy that others don't have access. And they need to look at the hill, for example. They need to look at it to learn how to model their life so they can be inculcated with the values of the hill. But they never are going to kind of be able to climb the hill. There's
That's
always going to
that's
be this dual state.
that's very pro. I mean, that's wow. Yeah,
I'm a
that's
profound guy, Isaac.
Rabbi, you are right. Now that's a lot to think, right? I mean, that's a lot of process, as in, how does this fit with the broader theme of his message? What he's saying is, he's saying that you people are special because you have access to this truth, and nobody else can have access to
Well,
that truth.
and this is why it's used in speeches. This is how John Winthrop used it. This is how President Ronal Reagan, when he wanted to say that Reagan cited John Winthrop in one of his speeches, and he said, we need to be exceptional Americans. We got to lead the world. John Winthrop said we have to separate ourselves from England. Martin Luther King said we have to go and kind of create the state that's different. Whenever you have this creation of a city on a hill, you're always condemning those around you. And that's why I think the Tower of Babel parable, it being a watchtower with a light at the top that could shine down and let other people see what you're doing, but you could also see what they're doing.
So these three examples you mentioned, right? These three examples, you have probably taken this verse, they've used this for this context, but wouldn't we want to look at this the other way around, as to look at this from the verses perspective, not so much how people have used this verses, how either Reagan or John Winthrop or somebody else,
Excuse me,
Martin
Martin
Luther
Luther King.
Martin Luther King, right? Okay, so they've probably taken this metaphor and they've applied this to to causes which were near and dear to their heart, which is all good and fine. But wouldn't we want to look at this verse in perspective of again from top down versus trying to make trying to find a coherent theory as to what fits amongst all those who use this verses for the context.
Well, listen, you're kind of trying to limit the text. You're saying that it can't work on two levels. I'd argue the nature of a hill and the metaphor of light it lends itself more so than any other thing we've ever done
Yeah.
to a dual level of interpretation. If someone just says, you are the light of the world, no one believes that they are the light. This is inherently metaphor. And the next line, you are on a hill that can't be hid. These are metaphors. Even though they're literally on a hill
Okay,
right now.
so a city set on a hill cannot be hidden. He's not saying that you are the city. It's a city set on a hill. So what I'm trying hard to understand is saying when you say that by being above that others cannot access this. I hear what you say in the sense that these folks have access to this, but it's one thing to say you have access and then the others don't have access to this, right?
I
So
think there's a prescriptive nature to what Jesus says, that he wants you to be like him, but he
mhm.
recognizes that, which the first 8 Beatitudes focus on, that there's so much corruption from people's world that they can't repent to the level to free their minds to see the ideological reality and the metaphysical reality from his perspective. If this is anything what the prophets of the Bible lambast the Jewish people for, what Moses lambasted the Jewish people for, Moses like the Torah and God is so clear to me. How could you guys sin like this? It makes no sense. Whenever these people are fail, it's always because they have a bias that's blinding them from the truth that's standing right in front of them. This is
And I
Moses,
think
like
it's
literally
yeah,
when he cries out to God every single time. I like when they do the golden calf, when they when they do any kind of idolatry, whenever any of the prophets, when Jeremiah or Isaiah calls out to the people, he's always calling out that you're missing the point. How could you do this when God should be so clear to you and God will support you if you have the right ideological attitude?
well, thank you for mentioning Moses. I think in light of that, it probably makes sense. I'm reminded of this verse in Psalm 103. Is it Psalm 103 which speaks about, oh yeah, Psalm 103, verse 7. He made known his ways to Moses, his acts to the people of Israel. As in Moses
Yeah,
knew
but
the
Moses
way.
kind of lived up to the model and the people kept failing.
Mhm.
So the question is, if God makes himself known, whatever that means, or by splitting the sea or by whatever he does, how can the people keep failing? And you see that there's this some kind of horse blinders on the masses, that
So
this
yeah,
elite kind of religion
yeah.
was never meant to us. And it's what's again where Jesus is acting subversively. He's trying to say that the meek are the ones who should have, the ones who are not polluted by some form of communal religion will have better access to the truth of God, which is again, it's not obvious that's true. It's almost like the uneducated. This is the model, as we mentioned, that Muhammad does. That the uneducated Muhammad, the one who can't read, is the one who could somehow access God better, most likely because he's not polluted by the forms and frameworks of religion that his predecessors had.
So this is what I'm hearing you say. Jesus took the conventional thinking of that day and he was subversive in the sense saying that the people who have access to this deeper knowledge are those who are meek and humble and poor in spirit and and those who are pure in heart. But this concept of separation between some who know God and some who have special access and some who don't have a special access is part of Judaism, or he was taking a concept which
I view
people
all
knew.
those all the 3 examples you just gave, I would view as metaphors. Like the fact is, Jesus, as we know, specifically the Matthew community of Antioch, lambasted against the Pharisees of Yavne, the Pharisees of Usha, the Pharisees of Judea, namely that they were responding to a crisis in post-temple time period. And obviously the Christians were responding in a very, very different way by saying, it's the end of days. Don't worry about trying to set up infrastructure for the future of the Jewish people. Just kind of live it up and party it down. Jesus is here and Messiah is here. So it's a very different attitude of how to respond to the destruction of the temple and kind of God having a different relationship with the world at that point. So we
Yep.
see these are very different models. Generally when a temple is destroyed, or like the 2 years before, whenever you're under threat, there's a lot more messianic hope around the end of days when people see less hope in the world in general. So what happens is that I think this is just a different model about how to respond to the temple's destruction. And Jesus is saying that those people who have always led us, let it be the Pharisees or the Zugot, the couples, whoever these people are leading us, they have led us astray because we haven't had the Messiah yet.
Yeah.
It's always a point of contention and a condemnation in the Jewish world. Every day that does passes about a Messiah coming, that means there's a failure. So there's always like this in our back of our head, there's this idea that failure existed either individually or communally that Christians don't have. I always wonder how Christians feel that they live in a messianic era, but they at least don't have that kind of back thought that I have this condemned nature. Jews will think, well, Messiah didn't come, the temple's not rebuilt. That means I personally am failing. So Christians just don't have that.
Yeah.
Okay, so when Jesus then says, set up a city on a hill that can't be hid, I think this falls into the same kind of metaphor that we are trying to show you to have this kingdom of heaven on earth. I believe that kingdom of heaven is living on this hill that everyone can see. It's not hidden, but you may not see it in the end of the day because you may not be meek enough. You might not have a humble enough spirit. You might just be a person who's too gregarious and too focused on money. It doesn't matter why, but there's a million reasons that you just can't do it.
I
It
can't.
can't even
Yeah.
be hidden. I can't hide it from you. You know who's going to hide it from you? You're going to hide it from yourself.
Yeah.
You're never going to look up.
Mhm. I can't believe that people would have understood all this. It seems so
If only the
metaphorical.
people then were as smart as you and I. They would have gotten it all.
If only people were as smart now. Because the problem with the metaphor is it can be easily misinterpreted. Right? Metaphors can play at multiple levels, and I'm surprised that he uses so many metaphors to convey these profound
But
truths.
you got to realize, at the end of the day, he was, we spoke about how Matthew, he not only is a preacher, but he's a teacher. That Jesus does not show up as a teacher in the other synoptics. So even though obviously these parables do exist, I guess he is a teacher, but the verb teaching is not used.
Mhm.
So what is the best way to convey knowledge? My wife and I discuss this regularly about if one wants to have a lasting impression on the youth or a lasting impression on the universe, what would be the best way to commit ideas such as inculcated the ideas and the values of the people? So metaphors and
Write books,
stories in general.
Rabbi. Write a book.
Write a
Like,
book? Why would I need to write a book? I have you. So, so the point is that in general, the best way to convey knowledge to the masses is in story form. Many times when we look at there's two Talmuds, the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud, we have the same story that shows up with 30% different facts. And that makes perfect sense to me because the stories could be adjusted to the times. The stories could be adjusted to the storyteller. The story could be adjusted to the crowd. And I think Jesus, what we generally have to see is that we haven't really talked about how, once we finish the sermon, we probably try to understand why do all these pieces of the sermon fit together like Legos? Why is this happening right after John, right after the first baptisms? So a lot of times because we're going chronologically, or at least textually chronologically through the text, we're not able to see the big picture. And we're not really able to make an argument. We're really just looking at verse by verse to try to see what argument is in the verse. And we can't really see what would happen from the big picture perspective.
Rabbi, on that note, I think
On
this
that
is a
note,
good place to start. Thank you. Happy again. Enjoy your Pesach celebrations. And a city
we
set on
continue.
a city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Lots to think on that. Thank you.
Okay, speak to you soon. Okay, bye.